This is the iceberg of RuneScape. At the top we have references that most people who haven't even played this game can understand. Like for example, the Gnome Child, something that became one of the most iconic memes in the history of this game. But as we go deeper into the depths of the iceberg, we start to come across references that most people have never even heard of. For example, the instant demo build of RuneScape back in the day, which was a fascinating method for Jagex to pull in new players. Unfortunately, in the end, it didn't quite work out, but it's still a nice relic from the past. In this video, I have referenced over 50 moments, incidents or people that have left their mark in the history of RuneScape, and we're starting off at the top. See Shanty 2, a music track that has taken over the mainstream gaming industry at this point. It has gathered over 40 million views throughout different channels on YouTube and Spotify. It's used by many of the biggest streamers on Twitch, and it's become an iconic song that people just know without even understanding what the game of RuneScape is about. The composer of this track had only 60 kilobytes of data to work with, and he had the task of making a simple yet catchy tune with that space. It's safe to say that he did indeed succeed. 2007 RuneScape, the most famous period in RuneScape's history and one of the biggest snowball effects in gaming industry ever. It all started way before 2007 when Jagex had a massive problem with bots and cheaters who were farming gold to sell on the black market. Jagex simply couldn't keep up. It was one band-aid fix after another, so the best solution they found was just to remove trading between all players, meaning you can't swap gold anymore, and that's what they did in 2007. Unfortunately, this was the main core mechanic of RuneScape, and removing that meant removing a big portion of the game, including the wilderness. Over the next few years, players started losing interest in RuneScape because the game they fell in love with just didn't feel the same anymore. And just to put into perspective, before all of this went down, RuneScape regularly had over 200,000 players online, but after the famous trade removal incident, it took only a few years until RuneScape lost almost 5x their player base and the numbers dwindled down to just 40,000. Luckily, that snowball effect also introduced microtransactions because Jagex was desperate to stay afloat, which also introduced back the 2007 RuneScape, aka old school RuneScape we know today. So basically, we've come full circle now. The Gnome Child, an iconic character in RuneScape that became one of the most popular memes on the internet. It all started when a RuneScape player posted a funny meme with the Gnome Child where the character reads a philosophical quote about life, and that meme spread like wildfire. It took only a couple of weeks until you could see the Gnome Child on mugs, t-shirts, NFTs and mousepads. There were even music videos related to this character. Anything that can be custom made had the meme on it. To this day, and you can still visit him at the Gnome Stronghold, and when talking to it, you get tons of meaningful dialogue about life. Zezima, likely the most iconic player in RuneScape's history. The first to reach maximum levels in most skills, the first player to reach 1 billion experience, and an icon to the most popular period of RuneScape's history. As time went on, he started playing less and less until in 2009 he announced taking a step back from the game, stating that he's gonna quit playing competitively because he's losing his sense of accomplishment in what he worked so hard to achieve. It is very hard to put into words how popular he was. Almost every player in RuneScape had him added on their friends list. Whenever he logged online, he always had a horde of players following him around. If you met him in game, it felt like meeting the biggest Hollywood star in the gaming world. It doesn't matter if you're a noob or an experienced player, everyone knew him. He was even mentioned as one of the biggest role models for all children in one of the studies made by Cartoon Network. Zezima still plays this game casually, and you can see him yourself in-game from time to time. Recently, he did finish a trimmed completion escape, which does require players to complete all major content available, including skills, bosses, quests, minigames, and so on. Okay, that was the first of the 7 rows in the RuneScape iceberg. All of these are widely known things that even people who don't play RuneScape know. So how about we go a little bit deeper? The second row will introduce topics that most people who have played RuneScape have at least heard about, but there are still some very fascinating stories that definitely will pique your interest. And we're starting with 060606, the infamous Valador Massacre incident that happened on 6th of June 2006 on the server World 111. 1 week prior to the incident, a new skill in RuneScape was announced called Construction, which allowed players to build their very own houses. In those player-owned houses, there were options for players to attack each other in a safe area just for fun. Somehow, just after the first player got 99 construction and hosted their very own party in their house, some of the players in that party retained their ability to attack others even outside where it wasn't a safe zone. This caused a few players to go completely rogue, attacking innocent players all around the map and taking their loot. The most famous person in this group was a player named Duriel321 and his iconic outfit with green party hat and abyssal whip. The Faladar massacre incident was due to an error in the construction skill code, where if you were kicked out of someone else's house while you were inside the combat ring, it still left you the option to attack other players no matter where you stood. Interestingly enough, World 111 became full in just a matter of minutes, going from 1,000 players to 2,000 just because players wanted to see the incident themselves. What's more fascinating is that Jagex at first couldn't ban the players who went rogue because there was a safe lock where you can't log out while you're in combat. So as long as the players just kept attacking innocent bystanders, Jagex couldn't force them to stop. Unfortunately, Duriel321 stopped being in combat for more than 10 seconds, and as soon as the timer hit, Jagex moderators banned the account immediately. Jagex later did say they were sorry about the Faladar massacre happening, but did not reimburse any victims of the incident. The Twisted Bow spawn. The Twisted Bow is one of the most valuable items in old school RuneScape, so it became a massive surprise to a lot of players when on February 28, 2019, the item was randomly just on the ground next to the farming guild and everyone could just grab one. Just to put into perspective, if you tried to buy the Twisted Bow with bonds today, it would cost you about $800. So the fact that every minute hundreds of these Twisted Bows were spawning into the game was a shock to say the least. It took Jagex about half an hour to figure this out and fix the problem. In this case, they just put 4 tree stumps on the top of the bow, meaning players couldn't pick it up. It was still there, and it was a sight to be seen by thousands of players, but nobody could touch it. But by that point, the damage was already done. It was estimated that about 10,000 Twisted Bows entered the game during that day, which would have completely annihilated the old school RuneScape economy. Jagex's initial response was to not roll back the servers, stating that they have it under control. They knew the players who took it and they're gonna remove all the unfair Twisted Bows. However, quite soon it became obvious that they have no way of tracking every Twisted Bow in the game because there was a lot of different ways to get rid of it. You could put the items in your death coffer, you could do staking in Dwell Arena, you could turn it into other items in Grand Exchange, and every single minute that passed by, these scenarios were more likely to happen. So about 3 hours after the incident, Jagex decided to roll back the servers to a state before the spawn happened. Players who turned their bows into bonds got banned. The current story goes that a developer was working on the Hespori boss in the farming guild and accidentally mapped a single Twisted Bow next to it, and this turned into one of the most obscure 30 minutes in RuneScape's history. Miniclip. Back in 2004, Miniclip was the site to go to if you wanted to play video games. It had hundreds of arcade type games starting from Zed, a game where you had to go through multiple dungeons, Bubble Trouble, a game all about precision. It even had games like the George Bush shooter, which was absolutely nuts to see and everyone played it. At the same time, Jagex was looking for new sources of players and they made a deal with Miniclip to host RuneScape on their site. The deal sparked an interest in likely millions of players throughout the next few years to join RuneScape, and probably was one of the main reasons why this game became so big. Everyone knew about Miniclip, and since RuneScape at the time was a very small game with a very big world, it gave the perfect opportunity for kids back then to delve into the world of Gielinor. Later on, RuneScape and Club Penguin also started fighting for the #1 spot in the Miniclip rankings. This was until a few years later when Jagex decided to branch out with their own client and Miniclip became the relic in the past. In 2022, Miniclip decided to put out their full focus on mobile games and stop producing and showcasing games on their browser. But it's safe to say that Miniclip was the reason most players found RuneScape. Swampletics, a RuneScape series that has gathered almost 50 million views on YouTube throughout its journey. After Settled maxed out his Ultimate Ironman account that took 7,000 hours of progress, he had a new idea to lock his account into Mauritania, a single part in the map of Gielinor. Once again, he decided an Ultimate Ironman was the way to go, which means no access to any of the banks in RuneScape. The series became an immediate success from episode 1 when he had 50,000 subscribers, a number that took him 3 years to complete, and he doubled that number in just a matter of weeks. Even though Settled didn't come up with the area locked Iron Man series, he was definitely the one that made it popular. Settled had a way to tell a story in RuneScape that no other content creator had ever done before. Minuscule grinds like getting 15 agility in Mauritania, a grind that usually takes less than an hour to complete on a normal account, suddenly became a full-on interesting storyline that shaped the account to one-of-a-kind event. As the episodes passed by, so did the interest grew more in players. Everything came together perfectly, from settled storytelling, the unique perspective of playing RuneScape, to everyone just talking about it. It came to a point where the RuneScape subreddit had to put up a spoiler alert for not looking up Swampletics on the high scores so you don't get spoiled at the next episode. And it soon was clear that even if you don't play RuneScape, you want to see how this comes to an end. Unfortunately, just 2 episodes before the finish line, Settled lost all his progress when he died to a vampire in Mauritania. Thousands of hours poured into the account are all gone, and it became one of the most controversial topics in RuneScape. There was nasty rumors about Settled relationship, how he didn't drain the account himself, he didn't lose those items, and so on and so on. People were so invested in this series that they started to verify the situation with their own accounts. They used the same stats, same gear, same everything to see if what Settled did was possible. There was tons of speculation, and to this day, some people still think Settled faked it all. Overnight, the series went from one of the most beloved series of all time to one of the most controversial topics in RuneScape. This series is dead either way, to be honest. 1 year of people screeching at him for cheating, and not to mention all the conspiracy theories about his wipe. I think we're done here. No way I'm slugging through another year of anime filler-esque episodes of him killing crabs and catching imps. Godspeed for those who stay. Accidentally losing all your items so you can continue to milk the series even longer is very cool. Settled's best friend and another RuneScape content creator, Jimmy, made a public post on Reddit stating that Settled was ending a relationship and was dealing with a traumatic heartbreak at the time, and RuneScape community has absolutely no business in that. He continues saying that these RuneScape private investigators who are looking for any dirt on Settled are absolutely ridiculous, and he isn't milking anything here. He was planning to make 2 more episodes no matter what, and that part hasn't changed. Settled at the time was 20 years old and was likely dealing with a situation that none of us will probably ever have to experience. Despite that, and people telling how the series is officially over, Settled took a break, then started grinding again for the same gear he previously had, and somehow that made the series even more popular. He said 2 episodes left, and he meant it. When the first one came out, it immediately became his most watched video of all time, only to be broken once again by the finale. Jaggers commiserated a broken rune crossbow in the same spot as Settled died to memorize this event in the history books of RuneScape, and few years later, when Forbes did an interview with Settled, they asked what the crossbow means to him, and he said to be part of RuneScape forever is just a surreal feeling. It's tough to put into words how much this means, but it does mean a lot. Level 3 Firecape. Most players would say that Firecape is one of the most iconic items in RuneScape. That's where most players started their PvM journey, and that's where you see most players shaking like a leaf on their first attempt. So it was no surprise when 2 players decided to go head to head to see who can complete the lowest level Firecape in RuneScape. Exact and Randy, both experienced players, and their specialty is understanding RuneScape game mechanics to the core, which also allowed them to break the rules of RuneScape as we know. It all started many years ago when Randy managed to get a Firecape on level 30 Ultimate Iron Man account. Already at this point, it's a masterful achievement that most players could only dream of. But Randy wanted to push this even further, so just 1 year later, he decided to tackle this challenge again, and he managed to get a Firecape on level 17 combat account. Exact noticed that and basically said, hey, the challenge is on, and just few months later pulled that number down to 16 combat levels. Already at this point, this is something amazing that no other player has ever managed to achieve, which caught the attention of a lot of fans. People wanted to see what weird and funky mechanics they would use this time to get the combat level even lower, and that's what they did. Exact got the combat level down to 14. Randy saw the video and challenged himself to get the combat level down to 9, and Exact decided to do the exact same thing except 37 prayer, which put him into the combat bracket 8. And then a massive breakthrough came when Randy found a method to do the fight caves with 1 prayer level, a level 4 combat account on January 4, 2020. The idea culminated dick-eating Jad's attack with purple sweets while using Ring of Recoil to deflect back the damage. This breakthrough meant that level 3 Firecape technically was possible. They just haven't quite figured it out in practice yet. But only 2 weeks later, Exact and Randy both posted a video at the same time claiming that both of them got the level 3 Fire Cape and the challenge after years of trying and failing was finally completed. The level 3 Fire Cape was obtained for the first time in RuneScape's history. Looking back in hindsight and going through all the videos, it seems one of the reasons they were able to achieve this massive accomplishment was because they kept pushing each other to the limit. If it was only one of them doing this, it could have very well be that we still wouldn't see a level 3 Fire Cape today. But at the end, it is safe to say that getting a level 3 Fire Cape was one of the most entertaining pieces of stories in RuneScape's history. Rotten Cabbage, one of the 4 items used by Jagex moderators to control the game of RuneScape. The Cabbage specifically is meant to be used as a custom tool to spectate other players in the game and was mostly used during the Dead Man tournaments. The most famous Rotten item is probably the Potato, which allows Jagex moderators to spawn any items, set stats on any accounts, wipe inventories, teleport anywhere on the map, or spawn NPCs on the map. The most famous incident of the Rotten Potato is where a player managed to pull Jagex moderator into the game of Stealing Creation, a minigame where you can pickpocket other players. As soon as the Jagex moderator teleports to them, the player starts pickpocketing the J-mod and realizes, wait, I don't have the teaming level for this, so the player asks the J-mod to change their teaming level to 1 with the Rotten Potato, and the moderator is completely oblivious to what's going on here. The change happens, the player starts pickpocketing and steals the Rotten Potato from the inventory. At first, the player thinks it's just a normal potato, but after right-clicking, he realizes what he stumbled upon. He starts going through all the commands of the potato, and it shows how many different options there are for this item. The player realizes he might get banned very soon doing this method, so they decide to drop it to the ground and it disappears. The amount of damage he could have done with this item would have been insane had he known earlier. Spawning thousands of items to all players, spawning aggressive NPCs in safe zones, wiping inventories, and so on. Besides the Cabbage and Potato, there is also the Rotten Egg, which is used to teleport to every boss and skill location in the game. It is safe to say that the Rotten Vegetables are the most powerful weapons in RuneScape and could cause some massive havoc if landed in the wrong hands. 117 HD, a project that took 117 over 2 years to make. It was supposed to bring back the high quality graphics that many players were looking forward to. 117 showcased the progress of this plugin on RuneLite for months, and just 2 days before the plugin was supposed to go live, Jagex made a news post stating that 117 was not allowed to make the HD client public under no circumstances. They had years to let 117 know about this, but they decided to leave it until the very last moment. Jagex had their own HD client in the works and wanted to showcase that to the players once it's done. This made players very angry. To this day, the HD client drama still has 3 out of the 4 top posts on Reddit of all time. This got so bad that it made thousands of players cancel their subscriptions, calling it unfair that Jagex treated 117 this way. Jagex very quickly realized their mistake, and just 24 hours later, they backpedaled and allowed the project to continue. Also, funnily enough, the project Jagex initially wanted to shut down ended up winning the Golden Gnome Award for the best artistic creation. The HD plugin is still one of the most beloved features of the game, and it really showcased how for once players can come together and show how much they care about this game. Venezuelans. This is probably one of the saddest topics in the entire iceberg and showcases how gaming and real life can collide under some odd circumstances. Venezuela has been in the brink of economical collapse for years now. Their country is overpowered by corrupt politicians, meaning the common people have nowhere to turn, and if the economy isn't working, that means people don't get paid. That has led many of their people to rely on real-world trading from RuneScape to provide for their family. The gold on the black market as I'm making this video is around 15 cents per 1 million GP. Usually the Venezuelans moneymakers are going for around 3 to 4 million GP hour, meaning these people make 60 cents per hour. Full working days gives them around $5 to $6, which is barely enough to survive. This has put Jagex into tough positions because they do have to constantly ban these accounts since trading gold on the black market is against the game's rules. So on one hand, you have people who are literally fighting for their lives and RuneScape is their safety net, but on the other hand, you have Jagex who needs to protect the integrity of their game. Unfortunately, that situation started many years ago and to this day it hasn't gotten better. The prices of RuneScape Gold have also drastically dropped, meaning Venezuelans are slowly integrating other games like World of Warcraft, League of Legends, Fortnite, Path of Exile and many others into their daily routine. And with that, we conclude the second row of Runescape Iceberg. Some information was more available, some was not, but it's time to get to the details. Let's start with the Chinese Overlords. Back in 2011, the 3 brothers who created RuneScape officially sold the company to an UK investment firm, and since then Jagex has been handed over from one company to another. The Chinese investment group bought Jagex for $530 million in 2016 and heavily started investing into microtransactions to try and squeeze as much profit as possible. That made a lot of players leave RuneScape 3, and the 2011 to 2016 period is widely considered one of the lowest periods of game ever. In 2020, the company was sold again to another investment firm, who then also sold the company next year to Carlyle Group, who in 2024 also sold the company once again to another private equity firm. And it's very likely that the next owners are also gonna be something like that. So in the span of basically a single decade, Jagex has had 6 different owners and is likely looking for another one in the near future. Mod Jet. Probably the most infamous Jagex moderator that has ever existed. Mod Jet was junior content developer for old school RuneScape until September 2018, when he was dismissed from Jagex for gross misconduct of his powers. It all started during a Deadman tournament, when all the opponents of a PKing clan called Rot kept getting disconnected, and for some reason, Mod Jet had been in touch with the members of Rot before joining Jagex and was part of the clan. The story kept going even deeper when suddenly Reddit threads started popping up saying they have been scammed out of nowhere, even though their credentials seemed to be completely fine and there was no leaks. Coincidentally, this also started happening to players who were rivals against the Rot clan. Something didn't feel right, so Jagex did an internal investigation and they found no fault at first. Then another Deadman tournament was hosted and the final location was supposed to be outside of Falador. Whoever had this information would have a massive upper hand in the final fight for $10,000. And to a surprise of nobody, Rot was the only team to figure out the location. And no, they did not figure it out themselves. The final nail in the coffin was the fact that Rot members had multitude of one-letter names in their clan, something so rare and valuable that it seemed very unlikely to happen. Unless those names were specifically made available to Rot members. People started piecing together all these occurrences happening around the clan and one Jagex moderator affiliated with the clan, and it soon became apparent what was going on. Jagex did another internal investigation into Mod Jet and found no wrongdoing, but at the same time they also gave back all the one-letter very unique names to the original owners. It all came crashing down with the billions of GP he stole from players using his moderator tools. Despite not being involved with Rot anymore, allegedly he still used his account tools to scam players. It is estimated that Mod Jet took minimum of 400 billion GP from multiple players that on the black market at the time was around $200,000. And this doesn't even count in all the players who didn't catch on to this at the time and couldn't get the refund. Jagex can track everything through their system, and as soon as they started looking into these scammed accounts, Mod Jet was fired on the spot. Not only that, it later came out that he also destroyed untradeable items like void pieces, fighter torsos, defenders, just to ruin other people's account. Jagex sued Mod Jet and there was an investigation by the government. Rot clan completely disbanded him and didn't care about him anymore. He had to change his real life name twice just to stay anonymous, and he had all of his bank accounts frozen due to undisclosed income, which was allegedly the gold he stole on the black market. About 3 years ago, the court case ended and Jagex lost. Jagex lost against Mod Jet, but not because he didn't scam anyone, it was more so that Jagex fired Mod Jet without notice, and that was against the law in UK. The TLDR was that the court couldn't determine whether Mod Jet was guilty or not, and Jagex took the wrong approach firing him, because they already made him look guilty before the internal investigation was over. Furthermore, from the court documents, it was found out that 69 different accounts were accessed by Mod Jet. All of them had the two-factor authenticator on, but it didn't matter. Some of these accounts were accessed via a cell phone with an IP attached to Mod Jet's home location. Some accounts were logged in at the office through company's Wi-Fi at specific access points, which shows Jet on surveillance cameras at around these locations. Since his bank accounts were frozen, it is thought that he never saw a single penny of that money, and that was the story of the most corrupt Jagex moderator that has ever existed. King of the Skill. A temporary game mode in old school RuneScape where the aim was to gain most amount of experience in 24 hours of gameplay. The competition lasted for an entire month, and every player could log into dedicated worlds and compete with others. There was two categories: most amount of total levels and most amount of experience in every skill. In a sense, King of the Skill was the predecessor to Leagues, because just like in Leagues, the experience multiplier was times 10. Every account was an Ironman, and after 24 hours of gameplay, your account was immediately logged out, and that was it. Of course, as was expected, Woox won the entire competition with total levels, but the real controversy for King of the Skill came out few weeks after, when it turned out that most of the competitors had cheated to get to the top. Firstly, a lot of players used alt accounts to gain advantages in skills like smithing and fletching to seek out stores for supplies, and using alts was against the rules, so they had to seek out those players and remove them from the high scores. Good example of that was players who were using alt accounts to find Seiya gang activity and managed to get over 20 million strength experience in 24 hours of gameplay. Or another example was picking up ashes from the ground of other players and making serum 207 potions to win the Herblore category. Basically, there was cheese methods for every single skill, and Jagex had to find out one by one which players were real and which ones were not. The entire process was an absolute headache. Secondly, people who actually won the competition ended up also getting unfairly banned because the system in place to detect winners wasn't that good. For example, Evonabi, a player who also was the first one to obtain the Dragon Trophy in Leagues 4, won the King of the Skill. Of course, until he got banned. Then, a few days later, Jagex backpedaled and removed the ban, admitting their fault. And this happened to many other players who were not cheating, but got banned for cheating. Finally, after everything was done and dusted, the winners were announced, but another problem arose. People didn't get their winnings. In fact, some players had to wait 2 years just to get their lifetime membership added to their account, which was one of the prizes. Here is Osiris stating that it's been 2 years since I won King of the Skill and I still haven't received my physical reward. There was a Reddit post where a player waited 650 days to receive their reward until Modsween swooped in and manually added 10,900 days of membership on his account. King of the Skill was, however, disbanded forever, since it took too much effort for something that was supposed to be temporary, and Jagex just didn't have the resources to deal with all the cheaters and the winners. When it registers. Since we already talked about one game mode, we might as well mention another controversial yet hilarious incident. It's 2021 and Deadman game mode is in full effect. Deadman by that point has had like 15 different events, and honestly for the most part it's been a disaster. From ex-Jagex moderators intentionally DDoSing certain players to the servers not being able to handle all the loads, and since the prize pool was $10,000, there was a lot of money at stake here. So it's the 15th event in total, and Jagex has promised this time to fix everything. They decided to not host a massive final hour fight between clans, but instead the top 2048 players all fight each other 1 versus 1 until a single player remains. If a player experienced connection issues, they were immediately disqualified, so a lot of players couldn't even log in to participate in the final fights, and the players who can log in had an insane lag to a point where they could move only once every 5 to 6 seconds. The server was targeted by a DDoS attack confirmed by Jagex later on, which caused heavy lag for the players. PKers put hundreds of hours of dedication in the previous 3 weeks to make it to the top 2000, and now they couldn't even fight for the final prize because the servers just couldn't handle it. And bringing all of that together got us one of the funniest clips of all time.
One back, off prayer, this could kill Manx when it registers. Manx.
When it registers, look, they know it's lagging! Look!
Is on the back burner now, needs to hit a VLS spec big. 17 gets his one back, off prayer, this could kill Manx when it registers.
When it registers, mate! What the fuck? Look how laggy it is! The hit didn't even spawn! I can't do this today. I can't do this today, bro. I can't do this today. I can't do this today. I waited too long. I spent 3 weeks. I spent 3 weeks waiting for this. I did 14 hours, 16 hours every single day. I skipped the gym for this shit. Fuck! I lost 10 pounds for this shit. Damn it!
Furthermore, Jagex tried to recreate the finals again 6 months later, and even that event got DDoSed and was plagued by massive network issues, despite the fact that Jagex was very confident they have now everything set up nicely. The entire event was an absolute disaster, and since then Jagex has officially disbanded the Deadman tournament in that format. The latest versions of the Deadman tournament have been for the most part just fun, with prize pools given out randomly to top 25 players, and it is safe to say that we will never see Deadman in that format again unless Jagex decides to host a LAN event with offline servers. Day 1 boosted rates. There is an unsupported claim made by players, and some even call this conspiracy theory, that the drop rates for uniques from new bosses or raids are increased on release day. Some people extend the conspiracy to say that it only applies to streamers and content creators to pull players in. Secondly, it's actually not a conspiracy that much. There is some logic behind it. A lot of players are going to get the drops on day 1 just because of the massive amount of people doing it at the same time. This makes drops look more common than they are, but there are 20 people who get drops and 100,000 people who get nothing. It's the same thing when you see ultra rare third age drops on Reddit or YouTube videos, because usually players only show off the good loot, which makes it seem like everyone on day 1 is getting drops. What people don't see is the thousands of players who don't get the drops. Still, a lot of players believe that Jagex is boosting the drop rates on day 1 to pull people in and get them playing. That was the third row of the Runescape Iceberg. Now we're finally getting into the deep end, and some of these topics are so obscure that even as I'm presenting this video to you, I have no idea how these were found out. Let's start with the Desert Treasure origins. Desert Treasure 1 origin story is one of the most fascinating things in this game's history. Back in 2004, Runescape started getting more and more popular every single day, which also meant Jagex needed more people to work for them. Developers, community managers, analysts, customer support, and much more. So during the summer of 2004, Jagex hired tons of interns through universities in Cambridge to work on smaller projects in the game, like quests, minigames, etc, etc. 3 positions were opened up for content developers, and Jagex said that we will give you absolute free choice on what you want to work on. One was the Monkey Madness quest, which players absolutely loved, but the developers in the future hated. The second option was Throne of Miscellanea, which also brought kingdom management. And the final option was multi-part quest, which was the only thing they had going on for them. So the intern got to work, and nobody bothered him for an entire summer. When the QA analysts came to look what he achieved, they for the life of them couldn't believe what happened. Firstly, this multi-part quest had so many problems, starting with the fact that the quest giver was supposed to be the final boss. But if you're fighting the final boss, then other players can't start the quest, because the quest giver is currently busy, meaning only one player can do the quest at a time. Secondly, the intern added a login check for every player, and if they hadn't started the quest, the player would be immediately teleported to the start of the quest without any notice upon their login. Also, even though this was a members quest, the free-to-play players would have been also teleported as well. Doesn't matter if you're level 3, max account, free to play, if you have any quests completed, if you have any stats, everyone would have been teleported to the start of Desert Treasure quest. Not only that, but the dialogue was so poorly written with spelling errors in almost every sentence. The intern was immediately fired on the spot, but there was a problem now. Jagex had an entire quest worth of assets they couldn't use, and they were definitely not gonna throw those assets away. Since all of it was put together rather fast, there are now some odd instances of Desert Treasure that you might notice. One example is that the quest is called Desert Treasure, but you barely spend any time in desert at all. Or how there are tons of one-off characters in the quest that never appear anywhere else again, like the dude living in the sewers under Trainer Village. And finally, the fact that Majorat at the end of Desert Treasure 1 looks like Anubis, which was an asset for the previous quest, and no other Majorat looks like this. So basically, Desert Treasure 1, likely the most famous quest in RuneScape's history, was put together on the back of some questionable choices, to say the least. Mechscape. Like I mentioned before, the news of RuneScape back in 2005 spread like wildfire. Suddenly the game became one of the most popular MMOs in just few years. That also meant more revenue, which meant Jagex as a gaming company could start working on other projects. Their very first project, and the first time it was mentioned in 2006, was Mechscape. The way this game was described was sci-fi space game similar to RuneScape, and Jagex worked on this project for 3 years without revealing anything about Mechscape. Players were excited to say the least. But as with any new MMO, it takes sometimes up to 10 years to develop a full game. So it came as a shock to players in 2009 when Jagex said that they were just not happy with Mechscape, so they are gonna scrap some of it, but they're still working on the project, which is now gonna be called Stellar Stone, and that's their future sci-fi MMO. Players got to see even more concept art, which made everyone very excited. Players also had the chance to sign up for a beta access on Stellar Dawn website, and you can definitely notice how the development of Mechscape or Stellar Dawn was in full effect. Jagex confirmed that after 5 years of development, they are planning to release Stellar Dawn somewhere around 2011. However, just 1 year later in 2012, Mod MMG said that the development of this massive MMO that was supposed to throw everything else to the side is now put on pause. 1 year later, Mod MMG said that they are looking to continue developing the game sometimes in the near future, but in 2015 the development came to a full stop and Mod Matt K stated that Mechscape is put on hold indefinitely. He then adds that he managed to play an early version of the game and it was very cool. You had a spaceship which you did research and build components to make parts for your vehicle. Then you could land on different planets, gather loot, blow stuff up and so much more. It was supposed to be the next generation of RuneScape, but it never came out. Rock climbing boots. Climbing boots are one of the most iconic boots in RuneScape. Costing only 12 GP to buy, they were the perfect pair of boots for purers with 1 defense. They gave +2 strength bonus, which was the best option for low level peakers at the time, and the boots have always been in demand, mostly because to get them manually you have to go through a lengthy dialogue, or you could just spend the extra money and buy them from other players. This also was a thriving place for bots because players for the most part didn't want to manually go through the dialogue for a pair of boots. But for scripting, this was perfection. Jagex countered that with giving the Quest NPC a shop interface so players could just buy an entire inventory with few clicks. It was such a cheap alternative option, especially for PKs for almost no cost. At this point, it's causing certain balance issues because the item was meant for PKers, and if PKers can have good items without risking any money, that's a problem. So Jagex had to come up with another solution. The climbing boots were meant as a quest item that gave no bonuses, but after you complete the quest, you can buy rock climbing boots, which now sell for 75,000 GP. Everything was approved, and as with every update, an email was sent out to Jagex's staff beforehand. The normal weekly update happens. Few changes in free-to-play, a new quest and changes to the climbing boots. It took only 1 hour until the riot started gathering where players called this the worst update of all time. The problem was simple. All the current climbing boots in players' bank were turned into rock climbing boots, meaning if you bought climbing boots before the update for 12 GP each, those same boots would now have a value of 75,000 coins, making few PKers literally billionaires overnight. Mod Mark tried to calm down the player base, saying there was only a handful of people who had over 1,000 pairs of boots, so in the grand scheme of things it doesn't hurt the economy. That turned out to be a lie, because as soon as the post was made, people started sharing boast of them having more than 10,000 boots in their bank that they probably spent less than 1 million GP on. And now those same boots cost almost 1 billion GP. There was even a collection with over 400,000 boots, which was estimated to be around 250 billion GP. Imagine your bank value grows this much by doing nothing. This caused a massive suspicion in players, especially after a forum post came out saying there is a rogue Jagex moderator who revealed the information to few selected players on day 1 before the update happened. It didn't help that when players went to complain on the official forums, Jagex kept deleting these threads to somehow hide the negative feedback while simultaneously doubling down and saying that everything is fine, and this doesn't have that big of an effect as players might think it is. As with every riot in RuneScape, things started to calm down, but the statement was made. Players genuinely believed there was some inside job that made few players rich. What it did, however, is make a lot of players quit. Because imagine a scenario when you have 3 pairs of boots and you obtain over 200k GP from it. Your friend, however, has 3,000 boots and their bank value jumps up hundreds of millions of GP overnight. That was an extremely demotivating for a lot of players, and was just one of the many reasons why the player base of RuneScape started to heavily decline in 2011. And that was the conclusion of the 4th row in the iceberg, and we still have the best of the best left, the most obscure topics in RuneScape's history. PAFT, aka Personal Area Force Teleport. In RuneScape, PAFT is when your character is teleported into another player's personal area. If you don't know what personal areas are, Jagex made RuneScape into small sections on the map. You can actually look up each individual section on osrs.world yourself, and every time you click on something, whether it's a quest dialogue, raids, bosses, and so on, the game places you in your own personal area. Once you leave this area, the game deletes it immediately. PAFT comes into play when that area isn't either completely removed, or the game thinks you're supposed to be in that place. Good example of that was the Song of the Elves quest in Old School RuneScape, when during the Ardoin Castle cutscene, the upstairs castle wasn't properly mapped. So when you click the stairs, you would appear in other players' cutscene, and there would be overlap. Other example in the original RuneScape was when players would team up in fight caves to obtain fire caves. Multiple people ended up in the same personal area and everyone could attack the monsters together. Now PAFTs can be fun and harmless to mess around with the game despite it being against game's rules, but it also can be used to smuggle out items that players shouldn't have. Good example of that was dungeoneering. Players could go into instances, take all the items and then just leave with them like nothing happened. Or using the class 5 dagger from Stealing Creation minigame, which was at the time one of the most powerful weapons in the duel arena against other opponents. This weapon was never meant to be outside, but with the PAFT, you can just leave Stealing Creation and take it with you wherever you go. So in conclusion, PAFTs are taken very seriously by Jagex because it could absolutely destroy the game, and developers have to double check every update to make sure there are no leaks that players could abuse. -1 trillion GP. For the first time in the history of old school RuneScape, a player managed to save up 1 trillion GP and then Jagex banned the account. It all started from a streamer named BTS. He was a known deathmatcher in the old school RuneScape community. Deathmatching is when two players go head to head in predetermined rules before the fight starts while staking certain amount of money. It ranges from 1 million GP up to billions of GP. BTS was very good at this one activity and managed to grow his bank billions every single day. He even live streamed all of this to showcase the legitimacy of his method, which for the most part was just getting the first hit on a deathmatch due to game mechanics. This oftentimes led to him getting over 50% win rate over the other players. For 7 months he live streamed all of his stakes, and on September 2023 he was the first player in old school RuneScape history to obtain 1 trillion GP bank. To put into perspective how much money that is, on the black market it currently would be roughly around $150,000. The only problem with having this much money is trying to move it all from one account to another without getting noticed. If you wanted to accumulate this amount of in-game wealth through bonds, you would have to pay Jagex approximately $500,000, giving you roughly 90,000 bonds. That's how ridiculous this amount of money is. So it came as a big shock to the community when one day the account couldn't be found on the high scores. Speculations immediately started and it was clear. Jagex had removed the account for real-world trading. BTS himself said that he was just doing giveaways, a thing he's been doing for a long time now, and he's right. If you check through his Twitter history, he does giveaways almost every month. Mo the Isa responded back saying that it was very clear on Jagex's end that someone was accessing your account and using it to trade hundreds of millions of GP through it, which was then sold shortly afterwards. BTS responded back with a 20-minute video of his own, and without going too much into detail, it's a lot of people just telling their side of the story without any concrete proof. Jagex stood by their word and kept the account banned, which made BTS the first player to obtain 1 trillion GP and also the first player to get their account banned with 1 trillion GP. Trade Octagon. This was a project made in 2005 when Jagex had one of the most brilliant ideas that never came to life. The Trade Octagon was supposed to become the stock market of RuneScape. In here, you can bid on prices, you can buy stocks of certain companies, see them go up and down. It even had a trade referee in the middle of the Octagon who brings order during trades. In Geldagrim, there are 8 mining companies, and the initial idea was that players could put their money on which company value goes up and down. If you work for a company and intentionally tank their prices, they will prohibit working for that company again. The Trade Octagon has a fascinating story behind it where oftentimes the smaller companies get pushed out, the bigger ones take over. It looks like a real stock market. This can also be seen during the Giant Dwarf quest where the player has to help the companies with orders and eventually kicking out the Red Axe for breaking the rules of the Octagon and manipulating with their political power. Although there are only 8 companies in the Octagon, there's actually hundreds in Geldagrim. Some even don't have a name, and the game update update in 2005 was supposed to push out companies that don't profit and push in new companies to replace them. Some of the companies were even themed after the beliefs, like for example the Yellow Fortune company only allowed female characters to work for them, and the opposite was the Brown Engineers who only allowed male workers. Unfortunately, the RuneScape stock market, which would have been one of the biggest updates in RuneScape's history, never truly came to life. Opulant Tables. I'm gonna summarize few years of events in just 30 seconds for the Opulant Tables to make sense. In 2007, Jagex was having massive issues with bots and gold farmers. The kids used their parents' credit cards to buy gold on the black market, and the gold sellers stole the credit card information to buy membership on multiple bot accounts. Once the parents realized what little Jimmy did, they filed chargeback on their credit cards, and the credit card companies in return went to Jagex and were like, "Hey, Jaggy Baggy, stop whatever is going on here with the credit card fraud, or we'll stop allowing you to use our credit cards for your business." So Jagex was like, okie dokie, nobody is allowed to free trade anymore, which was a success in stopping the credit card frauds, but it also caused one of the biggest changes in RuneScape's history. Now players needed some other methods to trade valuable items. One of those methods was using junk items, basically things that nobody cares about but still have good grand exchange value. Items like poisoned weapons, flatbacks, Brutus shields, and so on. And that's where the Opulant Tables came into play. Or I guess a flat pack version of that table. They were meant to so-called soft the trades because they required marble blocks and gold leaves to trade, which means technically they still had value despite being worth 3000 gold in the GE. Jagex was still not happy with how players manipulated the market with flatpacks, so in 2008, after the free trade was removed, Jagex added a new option for few days where you can sell the noted flatpacks to Advisor Grim in Miscellanea for an insanely massive price. You can buy the flatpacks as junk items from GE for few thousand gold and sell them to the Advisor Grim for over 100k per item. And since you can sell him noted flatpacks, many players had thousands and thousands of these laying around in case they were needed for their junk items. After the update went live, some players managed to obtain over 100 million GP in less than 5 minutes, and this went on for few days until Jagex quickly realized their mistake. Flatpacks used to be a common clue reward, and Opulant Table flatpacks were obtained from hard clues, so some players had thousands of these laying around in their bank from just completing hard clue scrolls, and they became filthy rich overnight. When it finally hit Jagex and they made changes, the price was reduced down to 10% of the initial value, and furthermore, you couldn't sell noted items to Advisor Grim anymore, which was the real moneymaker in the first place. When the flatpacks were removed as common reward from clues in 2009, the moneymaker lost most of its value, but it's safe to say that despite Opulant Tables being one of the most obscure items in the game, it also has an interesting place in RuneScape's history. And that was row 5 out of 7. We still have 2 more rows to go, and these are creme de la creme of RuneScape history, the best of the best. The Runescape Movie. Back in 2007, Jagex had massive plans with RuneScape. They wanted to make tons of new games in the office, they wanted to expand the universe in RuneScape, and most importantly, they wanted to make feature-length movies about RuneScape. It was supposed to be a live-action movie featuring the biggest Hollywood stars. Jagex even made polls in the official forums asking who should play the wise old man, who should play the sandwich lady, and there was very interesting answers. Apparently the most voted option for wise old man was Arnold Schwarzenegger, with Hulk Hogan being the second choice. I don't see what Hulk Hogan and wise old man have in common, but it was 2007, a very different time. And of course the sandwich lady should have been Angelina Jolie. Who else, honestly? The idea started in 2007 and there was news about it coming out in 2009, but at the end of the year, Andrew Gower said it's very unlikely we're gonna see a RuneScape movie. 2 years later, Financial Times reported that the new investors of Jagex are looking to cash in and are exploring the idea of RuneScape made into a film again. This time the lead would have been with the corporation Hasbro, who also made Transformers, Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons movie, and many more. Unfortunately, that idea also never came to life, and when asked about it again in 2017, Maud Mark said that if there ever was a movie about RuneScape, it would have been something comedic like The Princess Bride or The Stardust rather than something dark. One idea was to bring life the RuneScape quest Ritual of Majorat, which is in some ways similar to Desert Treasure 2 in old school RuneScape. This movie would have had insane cast of characters like Sanic, Wise Old Man, Lumbridge Guide, and so on. Few years prior, there was also talks with a Chinese company that specializes in making monster-style movies, and their idea was to make a movie from the perspective of cave goblins and how they emerged to the surface. This was all heavily in talks with Jagex, and the idea was there and everyone wanted to make it, but again, unfortunately, it never came to life. Now, in 2025, we still don't have a full feature movie about RuneScape, but as we've seen with few other video game movies or series like Arcane, World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, there is a market for it. So hopefully in the future, we actually might see a RuneScape movie. Mounts. Back in 2014, Jagex wanted to add another Gielinor into old school RuneScape. The initial idea was to basically make a new land the size of original RuneScape 2 right next to it, and that's where all the new updates would go, while the old original nostalgia content would stay in Gielinor. And that's also where the ideas of mounts came into play. You see, in most games like World of Warcraft, mounts are a way to move around faster, but in RuneScape, there really wasn't any need for them. Most places are very accessible, and teleports solve a lot of the issues with mobility. That, however, didn't stop players from comparing one game to another, and the idea of mounts still came up consistently. But now there was a reason. The idea to add a new massive landfill next to Gielinor, mounts might actually work in RuneScape. Unfortunately, back then, old school RuneScape team only consisted of 4 people. But Maud Reach had a dream to make Seiya something spectacular with multiple raids, factions, and a lot of other cool ideas. So he made a Reddit post one day saying, "Hey guys, would you like to see mounts? I found a way to do them, but the question is, do we need them?" You see, the main concern for OSRS players was that mounts aren't possible in the game, so Maud Reach wanted to prove them wrong. And it wasn't only the players who were talking about mounts, Jagex internally discussed this as well. Mounts are a colossal part of all MMOs, and the discussion is gonna come up one way or the other. Their idea was to be used mostly for mobility, and you couldn't do scaling activities while you were mounted. In fact, you couldn't do a lot of activities while mounted, and that's where the line was drawn. Despite showing that it is possible, it just isn't what people would expect from a companion. Not to mention that RuneScape is very tightly spaced, so mounts would just feel kinda off. And you could see that from the initial Reddit thread as well. It looks cool, but that's about it. Everyone running around with giant dragons would just become annoying at some point, and most players agreed that despite the idea looking awesome in theory, it just wouldn't work out in RuneScape. Omega Egg. In August 11, 2016, there was a quality of life weekly update in old school RuneScape that fixed a lot of issues with tons of minigames, Last Man Standing, Fishing Trawler, Shades of Morton, and few others. In the bottom of the news update, there was a small change where the value of the Barbarian Assault eggs was adjusted, and now they appear on top of the stack. This meant only one thing. The high alchemy value of Omega Egg was made bigger in order for it to appear at the top, and that became clear when players found out that the high alchemy value of Omega Egg went from 1 GP to 100 million GP with this update. Well, no harm done, because the only way to obtain the egg is through the Barbarian Assault minigame, so there is no way to actually high alch it, right? Not only that, but you can't even high alch it in the first place. The only way to turn them into gold is if you die with the inventory of Omega Eggs, in which case they would be 12.5 million GP each. Well, as fate would hold, that's exactly what happened. I want to preface that with this story, there isn't any actual concrete evidence like with most other stories, and this for the most part is an urban legend among RuneScape players, but there are tons of information out there pointing to this being one of the biggest gold generation bugs in the history of this game. The most concrete theory for the egg smuggling was through the Trouble Brewing minigame, and was called interface stalling. Now, I'm not gonna pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but the too dumb to realize what's going on conclusion is that you could stack different interfaces in Trouble Brewing minigame to stall the game. If you have an interface in your screen, the game doesn't allow you to do most things. Then, using certain scripts and packet clients while having those interface stalls on your screen, you would go to the Barbarian Assault, make a team, get that team to wave 10, and you didn't even need the Omega Egg, which was a completed egg that required 5 players. There was another egg called the Yellow Egg in the final wave that had the same value. Once a player in the team has a full inventory of eggs, they collapse all the interfaces they gathered during Trouble Brewing minigame, and the game causes a forced teleport straight back to Trouble Brewing from the Barbarian Assault. Now, this is just a theory, but forced teleports are one of the most common bugs players have done in the past. Once you have full inventory of eggs, you would go to Deep Wilderness about level 20, where you had to spawn back in Lumby, and since this was before the Gravestone death mechanics, you would have approximately over 300 million GP left over, because despite the value of the egg being 100 million GP, the high alch value was 12.5. And this entire scenario from start to finish took approximately 1 hour to complete. So technically, in theory, theory, this was 300 million GP hour moneymaker. Bug abusers throughout the years have confirmed that the Omega egg smuggle is one of the biggest downfalls of the old school RuneScape economy. It also makes sense why Jagex suddenly changed the value of the egg again from 100 million GP to 100 GP a few years later. Someone smuggled those eggs out and someone became filthy rich. To this day, it's probably the biggest RuneScape dupe of all time. Konduit used to be the go-to unofficial client for players way before RuneLite came along, and it's actually one of the reasons why RuneLite is so popular today. Back in 2016, it was a competing client against OS Buddy, and the beauty was that it's free versus OS Buddy, which required payments to use certain plugins. Not only was it for old school RuneScape, but also for RS3, and it even had a similar interface as RuneLite in the early days. It was the go-to client for players and the first version of something good. The downfall of Konduit started with the fact that it was just one developer working on the client versus RuneLite, which was an open source and available to all developers. It also didn't help that just 1 year later, the only developer of Konduit got burnt out and sold his product to some unknown third party, which is believed to be the end of the client as we know. Reddit posts started popping up after it was sold that there is allegedly data breaches in the client, and any RuneScape player using Konduit might firstly get banned by Jagex and secondly get their account stolen. Also, people using Konduit started getting phishing emails, which further proves the data breach. At the same time, RuneLite just kept getting better and better every month. So as the development for Konduit stopped and the power of free RuneLite client rose to the occasion, everyone just kind of forget about the client that once was the #1 thing players used. Okay, we have one final row left. I purposely wanted this to be the most obscure topics of RuneScape to make sure that even the biggest fans of this game would think what these are. Let's start with the instant demo I mentioned in the beginning. Back in 2010, Jagex was desperately looking for new players, so they announced a new game mode next to free-to-play and members called the Instant Demo game mode. With this, you didn't have to make an account. You just clicked play and the game logged you in. Players had 9 quests in total they could complete, half of the free-to-play worlds and about 10 hours of content in total. They had their own dedicated world 901 and they couldn't access any other world like normal players. They couldn't even chat because for that to happen you need age verification. They also couldn't participate in holiday events. The maximum amount of money they can have on the account was 200k GP. They had only 34 bank slots available and they couldn't even use the Grand Exchange. At any point during your instant demo, you can upgrade to a normal free-to-play account if you want, in which case Jagex would save all your progress to their server. At the time it seemed a very useful feature. You could try out the game without having to commit to it and see if you actually like it. If after 10 hours you didn't like it, that's fine, you can just move on. It was mainly meant for sites like Miniclip where RuneScape was hosted, so new players can just try it out the game quick and easy. If you already had an account at the time, it's very likely you didn't even see the instant demo option. It was removed around the end of 2010 when Jagex was slowly driving away from hosting their game on different sites and instead focusing on their own client. Kayzertief, a name for one of the bosses that has relation to sailing and the sea. When you teleport to Wintertot in old school RuneScape and run west to the abandoned fishing village, you will find a single character named Rakar. When you try to talk to Rakar, he just blabbers back some nonsense, and it's safe to say Rakar has gone completely insane. According to the journal right next door, Rakar was left there and made an example for trying to destroy an ancient artifact. This artifact can also be seen in the fishing hamlet, and it says that people who stay near it will go completely mad and lose all power. Rakar is a good example of that, but if you wear a round Myers Nelm helmet, he opens up another dialogue option. He says that Kayzertief, who is beyond the reef, still remains asleep, pointing to a sea god. He continues saying that one day Kayzertief will save us all. This is very familiar in RuneScape to someone called Saudak, who is also a mysterious entity from the eastern Gillanor seas. If you break down the name in German, Kaiser means emperor and Tief means deep. So by that, it looks like the emperor of the deep seas currently remains asleep. However, this even goes deeper than that. The quotes Rakar is saying can also be heard from Patchface. If you don't know, that character is part of Game of Thrones books. It never made it into the series, but it is a semi-known character that constantly says, I know, OOO and repeats similar quotes when he went underwater during one of the chapters in Song of Ice and Fire. Patchface was on a ship lost at sea. No one else from the ship survived, so it's theorized that Patchface also died but was brought back by the drowned god. Patchface constantly mentions the drowned halls, and he also seems to predict things that happen in the future. Basically, he went mental after being abandoned, and that aligns with Rokar in RuneScape. Now, the most logical theory is that Jagex is preparing for sailing, and this Emperor of the Deep Seas that is currently sleeping could be many of the bosses that will be introduced with the skill. Who knows? Imagine fighting a sea god on your ship that pulls people in and also revives them if needed be. The other theory is related to Majorat, because the fishing hamlet was created by Jagex around the same time as they started working on developing Desert Treasure 2, and Jagex has already mentioned that they're not done with the Majorat questline just yet. Alt 0181. If you go to any text document or web browser, basically anywhere you can type on your keyboard, you can create a unique symbol by pressing down Alt key and then typing 0181 on your numpad. This is called Unicode, and one time it almost destroyed the entire RuneScape. Here's what happened. On February 25th, 2009, a bug was discovered where a single player would be able to crash hundreds of others with the same Unicode. By typing into chat Alt plus 0181, he would create the micro U character, and anyone who saw that character would have their client immediately closed and the game would shut down. The only way to avoid the Unicode crash was if you had your chat turned off. The reason for this was simple. The game just couldn't load out the micro U character in chat. This method was abused by many players near the Grand Exchange, Dwell Arena, Castle Wars, and other popular places. You could literally make 200 people log out in the blink of an eye. The most notorious use for this was in the Bounty Hunter. Back in the day, after the free trade was removed, the Bounty Hunter was the main PKing hotspot. So imagine a scenario where 100 people fight each other and suddenly all of their clients crash. If you were lucky enough and managed to kill your opponent beforehand, then good for you. But if not, well, someone just made you lose all your items. Jagex found out about this and made precautions until they fix it. Players were asked to stay in remote locations and not go near popular areas until they look into it. Jagex also told all the players to turn their chat off if possible. The three main activities for popular places were shut down, like Dwell Arena, Clan Wars, and Bounty Hunter. Nobody could enter those areas. Since this was on update day, some Jagex moderators had to stay in the office until 1 in the morning until a fix was implemented, but the damage in the past 12 hours was already done. Unfortunately, it isn't the only case when typing something into chat would crash the game for everyone. In 2023, Jagex added the rainbow chat to Old School RuneScape. A player soon realized that the same incident is occurring again. Typing the rainbow chat in public places will crash everyone around you. The problem was the same. The game just didn't understand what rainbow chat is, and instead of working it out, it crashed everyone who saw it in chat. The first incident was when someone reported that they crashed during a Sebak fight in Raids 3, and it only took few minutes for the news to start spreading. Jagex had to take down Old School RuneScape for a few hours and disable the rainbow chat until they found a fix. The worst thing was the advertising bots using rainbow text in GE. They spam every world and at a location where players are most likely to log in and out, which made it impossible for some players to even attempt logging in. As soon as you log in, you don't even have time to turn your chat off. The client crashes immediately because the advertising bots just don't stop using rainbow chat. But Jagex did manage to fix it on the same day, and as far as we know, no real harm was done. Build 666. RuneScape is divided into different build numbers. This is called the RuneScape protocol, and every time a new update gets added into the game, a new RuneScape protocol is also added. For example, build number 1 was back in 1999, when RuneScape Classic was first created. One of the most famous RuneScape build numbers is 317, which is the old school RuneScape build in 2007 and was heavily used by private servers as a base client to build their servers. Throughout the 20 plus years, the build numbers for the most part are just there to identify the period of time in RuneScape's history, but during build 666, something different happened. If you opened up the developer console, it would turn red, and when the next update came around and the build number went back to 667, it would go back to normal colors. This is firstly, of course, related to the devil and the number 666, but also it's a reference to the Falador massacre happening in 060606. Few years later, Jagex also opened up the world 666, and their only information available was to bank all your items. The people who participated in this event were taken to a special event location in Falador just to commemorate the 06 Falador incident. Okay, we have one more topic left, and I intentionally left it as last, because while researching for this video, this was to me the most fascinating and interesting theory I've ever seen about this game. The scale theory. RuneScape is big, but it doesn't really look that big. I mean, you can travel from one city to another in a matter of minutes. In reality, City of Falador is supposed to be a massive town with enough houses to host up to 50,000 people. Yet, when you enter the game and go visit Falador, usually there are few houses in a city and about a dozen or so characters. It also doesn't explain how players can run from Mauritania to Prifddinas in 15 minutes, despite the fact that it should take you weeks or sometimes even up to months to travel that distance. This is where the odd yet fascinating RuneScape scale theory comes into play. Essentially, it boils down to the fact that Gielinor we see as characters is not the real Gielinor, and instead is a much smaller version of that to fit the criteria of a video game. That in return allows us to have the world of RuneScape as we see fit. Imagine needing 3 days to travel from Varrock to Caterpie by foot in real time. You start your farming trip on Monday by the Varrock castle and end it on Wednesday in Caterpie beaches. That's supposed to be the real scale of RuneScape, but we don't see it. What we see as Gielinor is just showing the most important and relevant pieces of the world. But in reality, the fictional world of Gielinor is massive and something we can't even comprehend. But the scale theory is not only there to shrink down the surface of the Gielinor, but also create new locations on top of existing ones. Good example of that is the fishing trawler minigame, where you see locations like the Gielinor Sea, but until sailing is released, there is no way to access that in any other way. In RuneScape 3, there are even locations that are not in the game despite existing in the Gielinor world, like Lumford, which is supposed to be the bigger version of Lumbridge, yet we've never seen this location in RuneScape. It does exist in Gielinor, it's just not in the game. Because we see the gamified version of Gielinor, there are also multiple fourth wall breaks that occur in RuneScape. One of them is when you're talking to a bartender in RuneScape. 3 and he says that the world around is a computer game called RuneScape. He then goes on to describe a computer game as a magic box thing which can do all sorts of stuff. A really good quote from a gaming journalist said that not only this reveals that certain characters of the RuneScape universe are aware they exist within a video game, but this also highlights that our character is unaware what a video game is, meaning there is a difference between what we see on the screen and what's naturally occurring in Gielinor. This further supports the idea that the oldest elder god in RuneScape is called Yas, which could honestly reference Java application server, the engine RuneScape is built on. And finally, by removing all of these geographical restrictions of Gielinor, the developers of this game can freely establish their own interpretation of the Gielinor universe. Good example of that is Prifddinas. It's always been there. It's a well-established city in Gielinor, but it only ever came to old school RuneScape in 2019, because by that point it became a significant enough storyline in RuneScape that should be added in. And this goes for many other places in RuneScape as well. It's so much bigger than we actually see with our own eyes. So the next time you're walking around in game, you can imagine how the world of RuneScape is actually much more substantial in size and activity. But I thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all tomorrow with another video. I love you all very much. Bye.